Hey, what's up, my woods people? I'm Tyler Jones, and this is the Backcountry mini-series from the Element Podcast. Casey, fill them in.
Since we are diving headfirst into the backcountry hunting this season, we decided to call in some help and talk to some experts that know how to crush it in the backcountry.
So make sure and subscribe, and if this is helpful, we'd love for you guys to give us a 5-star rating and an iTunes review.
Absolutely. Now let's get into it because I still have a lot of Mountain House flavors to try before September gets here. Okay, today on the show, we've got Mark Huelsing of Exo Mountain Gear. What's going on, Mark?
Oh, not much, man. Just excited as we're into summer here and preparing for hunts. So glad to have this conversation with you guys.
Yeah, that's good. We are doing the same. We've been talking a lot of whitetail, talking a lot of elk. Just kind of, it's the season of dreaming. You know what I mean? Like, I've got a pretty good tag, so there's a lot of dreams involved there, but it's just always fun to think about like how the next season's going to go for you and stuff. But are you getting out and doing any bear hunting this time of year?
Yeah, so I'm actually getting ready to take off on a bear hunt. We do this thing every year with Exo Mountain Gear called the Death Hike.
Ooh, and that sounds super fun.
I've heard about it, actually.
It's as fun as it sounds, yeah. So, yeah, it's something different every year, basically just to test ourselves mentally, physically, test gear, that type of thing. Last year we did just shy of 100 miles in a couple days in Idaho. And we're actually planning on going to the Eagle Caps Wilderness this year. And with the way that the winter they had and the earlier dates we have for the hike, like snow is going to be impossible, basically. Like it makes finding a route, or at least a good, fun high route, really tough. And so we kind of called this audible just a few weeks ago, and we're turning the Death Hike into a Death Hike / hunt. And so we're going to be doing a team bear hunt, basically. So we have 11 teams of 3, and we're all heading off into different areas of the Frank Church Wilderness.
Oh, Idaho. Nice.
And then doing this kind of short, challenging, adventurous bear hunt. So we're actually starting at midnight, and then you have to hike at least 20 miles before you can even start hunting. So you're essentially hiking through the night to hopefully get into a spot 20 miles deep by daylight to kind of start the hunt.
God.
And we have some surprises along the way. So we're going to have different envelopes that guys have to open at certain times throughout this couple days of the hunt. And then those envelopes are going to have surprise challenges that no one knows about until they open the envelope. So it'll be interesting, to say the least.
That's cool. That's neat, man.
Yeah.
I really like the whole hunt concept. And let me make sure I heard you right. You said you have to try to cover 20 miles before daybreak?
Yeah, so the rule is, we have all these different teams, and to kind of ensure that people weren't hunting on top of each other, each team had to submit 3 route options.
Uh-huh.
And then so we assigned routes to make sure that teams weren't hunting on top of each other, and your route has to include 20 miles and 5,000 feet of gain, and you have to do that before you can actually start hunting. So if you were to spot a bear before then, well, sorry, you haven't covered your 20 miles yet. And then we're basically starting at midnight. So the idea is you're hiking most of that 20 miles through the night, hopefully finishing, a bit after daybreak, and then having daylight to kind of hunt that day. So, it's a pretty atypical hunt, but it was kind of like a last-minute plan. This area of Idaho that we're headed into is thick with bears, and they've actually reduced rates for non-residents, and they're trying to get more bear hunting in there. And we had this plan for this hike that went awry, and so we just decided to kind of combine those two things.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's
awesome. I'm not real familiar with the wilderness, but everybody's heard of the Frank, right? And that's the biggest wilderness area in the lower 48. Is that right?
Yeah, the Frank, I believe, is the biggest, and then you talk about like the Bob, which I think gets the most remote. Like you can get the most remote from roads within the Bob Marshall Wilderness. But yeah, the Frank is massive wilderness, big country. It's pretty interesting. There's some areas in the Frank where there's airstrips that were established before the wilderness designation. So a lot of guys will actually fly into the Frank and then get dropped off just because you can get in there. But That's not the route we're going for this one. I have some buddies who actually just did that a few weeks ago on a bear hunt and had some great success. But yeah, we're essentially just hiking in.
That's cool, man. Now, I don't know this much about that stuff, but I'm assuming this is Grizz country, and hiking at night in Grizz country just sounds like definitely the Death March side of what you're talking about doing. Is like, how do you is that correct? And how do you take precautions for that?
Yeah, basically just don't think about it. No, it's not. It shouldn't be too bad. Grizz, where we're gonna be. It shouldn't be too bad. So safety in numbers, plus, just, when you're hiking at night, you don't want to think about what's going on out there. And honestly, like, we are hiking in numbers, and we'll be, chatting and BSing and telling stories along the way and making noise. So it's not going to be like this stealthy mission where we should surprise ourselves into a scary situation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, it is like that fact alone is a lot of guys just flat out. You think of hiking in the wilderness and then you think of doing it in the dark, like that can start to play mental games with you alone. Yeah. And I remember even on my first wilderness hunt, the very first night I was, our camp was 4 or 5 miles deep from the truck, but then we hunted one evening and we're a mile plus from camp. And when dark went down and you realize you're miles from anywhere and then walking through the wilderness, like that stuff in the beginning can definitely play some games with your head.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's kind of where we're at. We're going to be going on a wilderness hunt this fall, and it's going to be, we kind of had intentions of doing this 1 year out, but it's kind of a year sooner. Nobody ever expects to draw a tag like this, but sometimes you're the lucky individual who gets blessed with it, and it happened this year. And so now we're kind of in a scramble and trying to learn as much as we can from people who are in the know, and try to just lessen that learning curve. But you're just talking kind of about your first backcountry experience. What do you think is like one of the biggest things that you took away from that first trip in that you wouldn't have thought would have been the case beforehand?
I don't know. Like it's kind of one, I mean, not that I've been doing it forever, but I've been doing it for quite a few years at this point. I'm certainly not like the expert, but I certainly have, some experiences and can tell you a lot of what not to do just because I've learned the hard way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of those things where it's cliche, but true, but as much as you look at maps, be it Google Earth or paper maps or something like Onyx or Go Hunt, you can look at country online or on paper, but everything is truly different until you get there.
Yeah.
And that's not to say don't study ahead, because I think the more you can study ahead, the more helpful it is in the field. But at the same time, it's really, really easy, especially when, you're from Texas, or I'm actually from Missouri. I'm from the Midwest.
Oh.
So when you're not used to mountain country and you're looking at maps, it's really, really easy to kind of underestimate it. Like, oh yeah, I'll just go up over that mountain. And then you get there and get to looking up at that sucker and you're like, oh, well, that was a dumb idea. So yeah, just that's one thing, is just what it takes to not navigate in the country, because the country is usually big, terrain features are big. So I don't mean navigation in terms of like direction or getting lost, but more of just what it takes to cover ground in that country.
Yeah.
It's easy to underestimate that. I mean, I think of even going back to my first elk hunt, and I remember spotting an elk on a hillside basically, and thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to go up there. And it was an opposing hillside, and I didn't realize there was basically a nasty creek bottom between myself and it. And I quickly realized as I started heading that way towards that elk that I had glassed, that it was going to take some effort to get there. It was going to take some time to get there. And so just little things like that of, just covering country, and you'll soon realize that elk are incredible in the sense that they're so big, but they can move so efficiently.
Yeah.
And just make us look ridiculous.
Oh, I know, man. It's funny, you talked about us being from Texas, and I'm sure being from Missouri, you had that experience at one point in time where you're like, I'm a flatlander, but I'm in decent shape. I'm going to go to the mountains and see what happens. And then you just start sucking wind hard. And all of a sudden, the elk that you just saw, you busted, and they're 3 miles away. And you're like, how did they even do that? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But
it is.
one of the you brought up a good point, like about being able to navigate the terrain and not so much, understanding how to get from point A to point B, but like in like what you're talking about with the Death March earlier. That's 20 miles in less than a day, and I kind of am wondering, and my plan is to try to make it out to this section of New Mexico this summer and try to get a good bearing for this, but maybe you just have a good idea. Like, what can a person assume they can, how much distance can they cover, like, say, on a hike in a day? Like, what's a good idea if you want to go in and backpack hunt? Like, what can you bomb in and do reasonably without killing yourself, and then not without being like so far back in that it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different being on a hunt versus just saying how much ground can I cover in that type of country.
Yeah.
And then elk hunting specifically, you really have to keep in mind, okay, I might be able to get 6 miles in, but what happens if I actually shoot an elk now? And can I get that thing 6 miles out? And so it's easy to throw around numbers and, kind of glorify getting deep and going farther and all that. And getting in is not the issue. And again, specifically for elk hunting, it's thinking through how far can I go and actually get an elk out and take care of it. And sometimes, there's no single answer there. Like, everybody has different physical capabilities, but then beyond what you're physically capable of, you also have different conditions in terms of heat, the time that you can have meat out in the field, or do you need to get it back as soon as possible because it's hot. So the first elk pack out that I did was 6 miles. And man, it's you'll learn for sure. We've had some shorter ones since, but yeah, I mean, in terms of just hiking and packing in, one thing I always encourage guys to do is set up your schedule and your time to allow yourself to get in without feeling rushed. And I know that that's tough to do because this is a hunt you've been looking forward to for months or maybe even years, and you want to get in there and you want to get started. But at the same time, don't burn yourself out humping in a 40, 50-pound pack and going hard on day one, where you're now in recovery mode on day two already. Because on day two, you need to feel fresh and not have to be recovering.
Yeah.
And so it can be, and again, for coming when you're a flatlander, it can be really easy to burn yourself out easy. And so if you have, 5, 6, 7 days to hunt, I would play that first day or two pretty dang smart in terms of not killing yourself, because a lot of guys can hunt hard for 2 or 3 days, but how effectively and how hard you can hunt on day 4, 5, or 6 is really where the differences are. So that's really where your training comes into play. That's really where, your nutrition comes into play, and basically how well you've prepared yourself and taken care of yourself is really going to manifest itself on, day 3, 4, 5, 6, not day 1 or 2.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I haven't really thought about that too much. I've I try to have the tough guy mentality when I'm out hunting like that, and not to say that negatively, but sometimes you just got to tough things out and just deal with it and hunt. But there's just so much you can do of that before your body tells you no, right? And I always try to look at not try to look at them, but I end up approaching hunts to where I go as hard as I can until I can't go anymore. And like what you're saying, especially in elk hunting, because it seems that the longer you're out there, the more September progresses, a lot of times the better the hunting gets. So there's no reason to wear yourself out on day 1 and 2 when day 4, 5, and 6 are going to be the best days of the hunt. So it totally makes sense, man. Now, when you're talking about wearing yourself out and going, a decent ways back in and that sort of thing, let's talk a little bit about navigating terrain. Do you think it's better, if you know you're going to have to gain some elevation, is it better to try to gain as much as quickly as possible, or to do it gradually and just kind of have that steady incline?
I don't know that there's a right answer there. It's a super interesting question for sure. I usually have a spot picked out that I want to head into, and then I'm figuring out the best way to get there, not based off of just elevation, but really just there's an interesting combination of trying to use trail systems, but then the more you use trail systems, the more people you're going to have using those trail systems, just because it's that path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And so sometimes if you can look at accessing areas that don't have trail systems, you don't have to go as far to actually get further remote. You can actually get further away from people by covering less distance, but just basically, covering some shorter but harder miles.
Yeah.
And so I've done all the above. I mean, we've done longer packs in, using more gradual approaches, more trail systems, more friendly terrain. And then we've gone shorter distances, but hellacious climbs that maybe some people overlook or some people don't want to do, just to kind of find little hidden pockets. So I don't know that there's one right answer there. It partially depends on, I think, your hunt and, are you packing in there for 5 to 7 days and wanting to get further deep and then basically establishing like a backcountry base camp? Or are you doing, quicker, still maybe overnight hunts, like multi-day hunts, but you're kind of bouncing around more and covering different country? In the end, sometimes it's just difficult because elk are where they are. And so I think another thing to look at is your covering terrain is not solely focused on, not getting too narrowly minded, focused on a spot, like however good you think that spot looks, but really looking at how can I move and cover country efficiently? Meaning, can I work a ridge system to be able to call into 2 separate drainages? Can I basically cover more ground smarter so that if I'm not finding elk, I can basically cover as much country as possible without killing myself? And then also either reach into country, as I mentioned, with either bugles, with locating bugles, or if it's more open country, maybe by glassing. And so sometimes it's the approach of letting your calling or letting your glassing cover country for you, but putting yourself in the right position where you can essentially cover country with your calling or with your glassing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds like a good way to approach it. So you mentioned training and nutrition as being very important to kind of like your pre-hunt, or I guess to your hunt as a pre-hunt thought, I guess. So what does that look like going into the hunt for you? I mean, obviously, a lot of people talk about wearing your pack and just hiking with it. Is there any other things that you might take on during the summer prior to elk season?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the closer you get to season, the more hunt-specific training you want to do, meaning you don't have to be killing yourself in November to train for next September's hunt. Obviously, it's good to stay in shape and good to do something active. I just mean that your activity, your training, your workout doesn't have to be hunt-specific if you're 8 months out. But as you get closer and closer, and you're now 8 weeks out, you want your training to be much more specific to the demands that you're going to encounter on that hunt. And so it turns into a lot more, legs and lungs, essentially. And so for me, I take that high level kind of year-round look at training. In the quote-unquote off-season, I'm still staying in shape, but I'm doing something less specific to hunting. And then as I get closer to opening day, it's more specific to hunting. Obviously, training with your pack, hiking with a weighted pack is invaluable. It definitely has to be a component of what you're doing. But if you're in Texas, hiking with a 60-pound pack is all well and good, but you're going to struggle to find the elevation, right? So you're going to struggle to find the terrain to replicate the type of movement that you're going to be doing with that 60-pound pack. And so, especially for flatlanders, and I myself can relate, you want to hike with the pack no matter what, but you also want to supplement that with some specific, I think, movements and exercises to help prepare for the elevation and for the terrains. Like just a few that come to mind, just basically box step-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, with a weighted pack, step up on a box, step down, step up with your other leg, step down. Mind-numbingly boring. You'll hate yourself within 10 minutes, I promise you. I absolutely promise you, but it's super sneaking effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so just you can take just those and, like, if you can hike 1 or 2 days a week, do those 1 or 2 days a week, and then scale, right? So you might start by doing, let's call it 15 minutes with 40 pounds. And then the next session you're doing 25 minutes with 40 pounds. The next session you're doing 40 minutes with 40 pounds. And so you can either scale time or you can scale weight. So either the duration of that is going up or the weight in your pack is going up, or over the long term, maybe both. So those box step-ups are really important, I think. Sandbag get-ups might not sound like something to do with hiking, but they're incredibly effective, not only at working the lower body, but actually work your midsection a ton. And something I think a lot of guys might overlook if you're newer to packing and specifically packing weight is there's a huge, huge demand on your midsection and on your core. And by core, I don't mean like beach muscles in terms of having a six-pack, but just basically your midline stability is really important because you're carrying weight up top and through your midline and trying to transfer that stability into your lower body where, your legs are essentially carrying that load and moving you through country. So that midline stability is really important. Something like sandbag get-ups are really effective there. I've done a lot of different things, tried a lot of different programs. Those are some of the things that stand out. We actually do have a free training program that we offer. If you just go to exomountaingear.com/train, you can get that. It's actually with a gym with some guys from Texas. So,
sweet.
Go Texas again.
Yeah.
But they're in Austin. They're called Atomic Athlete. And one of the owners of that gym, Jake, is a former Army Ranger, but also a super passionate backcountry hunter. And so he knows what it's like to go from Texas to the backcountry and up the elevation. And he also has, a ton of experience with training. And so he has a very helpful perspective and outlook and a ton of knowledge. And so we actually did that free training program with him. So that'd be something to check out.
Dude, that's awesome.
But yeah, so that's just, again, we could talk for an hour on that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because again, myself, like being a flatlander, I've gone through that, and trying to prepare for, elevation when you don't have it and being physically prepared for the mountains when you can only get out there maybe one time a year for a lot of guys.
Yeah. So what I mean, there's definitely, like, to me, a lot of guys, especially if they have decent enough money to go on an ice elk hunt or something like that, they're, one thing that they're not going to have as much of is time. And I feel like that, that's where hiking with a backpack for hours a day just doesn't make sense, So
yeah.
I'm sure you guys in that program address that in some of your workouts, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I myself struggle with that just because I'm busy with, family and small kids and work and all the other demands that everybody else has. And so it is difficult. That's where, for me, even though I hate doing like weighted pack step-ups, if I can do those for 45 minutes, I get a much more intense workout than if I were to hike for 45 minutes.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And so it's, what's going to kick my butt most in the shortest amount of time is sometimes a factor I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing to replace time on your feet, though, too. You do work your body differently if you're on your feet and under a pack for 3 hours than if you're doing it for a more intense 45 minutes. So I think as much as possible, you do have to work that in, and that doesn't have to be an everyday thing. I mean, congratulations if you have the time to work out 2 or 3 hours a day every day. I certainly don't.
Yeah.
But I will say that I've consistently, and again, this is something I do more and more as we get closer to the season, that I'll do what it takes to find the time. Meaning, there's been days I've woke up on a Saturday at 3 a.m. to drive to a trail to hike for 3 or 4 hours, and then still be back basically shortly after my kids are waking up, right? So, if I can hike from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and be home for the family at 8:30, then my family didn't really miss out. I certainly had to kind of suffer for it. But in the end, as much as 4 hours of hiking is good for you, and it is, that whole component of performing on little sleep, on struggling through fatigue, that whole like mental toughness piece of doing that is also, I think, just as important as it is to hike for 4 hours, because you're going to hit the point where you're tired out there, where you don't want to keep going. And so sometimes the suck of those long early training sessions is as much as about kind of the mental battle of going through that as it is getting the 4 hours under your pack. So it's kind of a win-win.
Right. So to kind of go along with this is the nutrition side of things, and like going into your hunt, what does that look like? And then how do you maintain decent health from what you're putting in your body on when you're back there? Are you just eating Mountain House, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's obviously I think it's interesting because it's all over the map. I think the nutrition that you do in the field for your hunt is only going to matter to a certain extent based off of what you're doing the rest of the year. So if you're not, and I'm not saying like you have to be perfect, but if you're not eating super healthy, you're eating junk all year, then it probably doesn't matter what you're doing in the field. Like eating super high quality stuff for 4 days during a hunt is only going to have so much effect if you're really not in the best shape anyway. But yeah, so at the same time, if you do eat pretty clean, and you stay in pretty decent shape, I think it's important to somewhat keep that up as much as possible in the backcountry. At the same time, you also have to realize that if you're hunting hard, your body is a furnace. And so sometimes just getting calories in and getting sufficient calories in is really important, and it's okay to throw in some things. So like I look forward to a backcountry hunt for 50 reasons. I mean, we can talk about the hunt itself and the adventure and the peace and the quiet, but like one of those 50 reasons that I look forward to a backcountry hunt is I can eat Pop-Tarts. Because I don't eat Pop-Tarts throughout the year, but like, hey, I'm out here working hard and I need the calories, and so I can eat Pop-Tarts, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting balance. We've had discussions with this on our podcast. I think one of the things a lot of guys do wrong is not that they don't necessarily pack enough food, but they actually don't eat enough food. Mm-hmm. And so you got guys all over the scale. Some guys don't pack enough food because they're trying to be light. Some guys pack ridiculous amounts of food, but it's not something, again, you get like day 2, 3, 4 into the hunts, and now they have this food that they don't have the appetite for. And so part of this is trial and error, but it's easy to get burned out on stuff, even in a few days, if you only have the same things or if you only have certain types of things. Mm-hmm. And so it comes into like personal, what actually sounds good on day 4 of a hunt when I'm hot and tired and don't necessarily feel like eating, but know that I need the calories. Because again, if you get behind on calories, and a huge factor is if you begin to get it all dehydrated, that stuff takes a massive toll on what you can do later in the hunt. So I think getting a proper number of calories is really important, and then picking foods that you can eat and that you're not going to basically like, if I see one more Cliff Bar, I'm going to puke type thing, is really important. And sorry, Cliff Bar, I'm not picking on you because I eat them, but if you don't have any sort of variety, you can burn yourself out, basically. Sure. So in terms of specifics, I do a bunch of really easy stuff. You mentioned Mountain House. I've done them. A lot of them are pretty good. There's more and more similar brands every day. So you can kind of tailor if you want to be more clean, if you will. You can go Heather's Choice or Off Grid Food Company or Peak Refuel. Like there's more and more cottage brands doing more natural food, I would say, that's free dries compared to like a Mountain House that has a bunch of crap in it. I actually dehydrate a lot of my own stuff these days. which sounds really intimidating, but is actually stupid easy. And so I've been able to tailor exactly what I want and then dehydrate it myself and rehydrate it in the field. So again, not to plug stuff, but we have podcasts on nutrition and on dehydrating and all of that. We actually have another food guide, so you can plug in some numbers on your body weight, your activity level on the hunt, and actually get some calorie recommendations based on that. So you can go to exomountaingear.com/nutrition on that one. And it's kind of another freebie that goes into a lot more detail on if you really want to look at numbers and kind of plan, and you're the guy who wants to kind of geek out a little bit on nutrition, that's definitely a great resource to look at, or just something to do quick and dirty to make sure that you're not underestimating calories. Because there's this idea out there that, the quote unquote 2,000 calorie standard diet, but a lot of guys, if they're hunting hard, they're going to need 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. And so now it's a question of how do you get that many calories and do it smartly to where you're not packing too much weight, but you also have the right types of food. So, I mean, there's a lot of preference to it, and then there's part trial and error, but there's a lot of good information out there as well.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, and that's just part of the stuff that we have to learn, part of the stuff that we're working on, trying to understand. And I don't know, kind of from what I see is like everything that you're going to put in your pack is the same, but food is what's going to change for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going on a hunt and it's a 4-day hunt, it's A, B, C, D, and E plus however many days of food. So at that point in time, it's kind of like, especially with this hunt, we have to decide, are we going to go in for 4 days, come out and resupply? Or are we going to go in for 9 days, the whole extent of the hunt, and try to pack for that much? So, Exo, one of y'all's big things is packs, right? What are you looking at for a pack and trying to make sure it has enough room and enough capability to do a backcountry style hunt like this?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, I tend to see a lot of crossover, and you just kind of referenced it, but this idea of you guys might have like a 7-8 day hunt.
Yeah.
But the question becomes, are you packing everything for 7 or 8 days? Are you packing for 3 or 4 days and then, coming out to either resupply, to move to plan B, et cetera? So many guys go, well, I have a 7-day hunt, so I need to pack so big. But the question isn't how long is your hunt, it's how long are you packing for at a single time. So you might be going out to Colorado or New Mexico or wherever and have 8 days to hunt, but does that really mean you're carrying 8 days worth of food and gear at a time? Most, and especially as you're newer, I think a lot of guys default to thinking they should pack for all 7 or 8 days at a time, when in reality they should be packing for 3 or 4 days at a time, and especially if you're heading into new country. If you're packing for 7 or 8 days, I mean, you're kind of putting all your eggs in that basket. You're hoping to find elk, and I've certainly done that. I've gone into new country with a week's worth of gear, and I've basically set up a backcountry base camp and hunted from there for 7 days, and I've killed an elk on day 7. So I'm not saying don't do that, but also think through, maybe we should go in with gear and food for 3-4 days, and either we're into elk in 3 or 4 days or we're not. Either we've killed something or we haven't. Either we know we need to move to a different area or we don't. Or like the worst case is, elk are still here, we haven't filled our tack, we have to make a quick run out and resupply and come back in. So I think that strategy determines a lot on your pack selection. We always, like with our pack specifically, want to focus on, even if you are getting a larger pack, we want it to compress down really well. And so even if you do get a larger pack that has the capability of carrying 7 days worth of gear, it's going to compress down really well if you're only carrying 3 days worth of gear. And it's going to compress down really well if you're heading out into a ground blind in Texas for 4 hours. Good packs are an investment. And so that's always something we're keeping an eye on, especially as more and more guys are doing all different types of hunts.
Yeah.
Myself included, you guys as an example. If you're dropping some decent coin on a really good pack system, we want you to be able to use that in New Mexico on an elk hunt, but we want you to be able to use that back home in Texas as well. So we always want the pack itself to compress really well. And then something else we really focus on is we have one frame system, and you can put different bags on it. So if you wanted to, you could get a pack system with a day pack and then have a different bag that goes on the same frame that is now good for a week-long hunt. So in the end, versatility is key to that. But in terms of actual pack sizing, if you stay in 3 to 4,000 cubic inches, like in that ballpark, you're kind of going to stay within that good 3 to 5 day range. If you're wanting to get beyond 5 days, you want to get up closer to 5,000 cubic inches or larger. Mm-hmm. Again, this is like generalities for most guys.
Yeah, sure.
It's tough too because the newer guys tend to carry more, and so they're going to tend to need more space. Mm-hmm. Whereas the guy who's been doing this a long time and has upgraded high quality gear and doesn't carry a bunch of extras, he might be able to take a pack further than other guys. So there's a lot to that. I would say in the end, again, I'm not at all trying to be salesy, but whether you're looking at our packs or another company, I would say just talk to them. Mm-hmm. So, you can call us up and tell us about your hunts and your needs and what you do, and we'd be happy to kind of talk through the pros and cons of specific models that we offer and how they might benefit you. And I would hope that if you're looking at another company, they do the same for you. I can obviously only speak for ourselves here.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it makes sense to me, and maybe it is because I'm a newbie at like the backpacking style hunting, but it would make sense to get something a little bit bigger. That way you're prepared for, say, if you do go on like a sheep hunt in Alaska in 10 years or something like that. A, you want a pack that's going to last that long. But B, like you're going to want something that's going to hold everything you need for like a big adventure style pack like that, as opposed to having to buy something, again, that's going to be a bigger pack, So to me, it makes sense to go with that, 5,500 or whatever it is that you were talking about a while ago. And then, like you were saying, it'll always compress down. You can always day pack with it, right? And it's going to... you might add like a half pound, 3/4 of a pound or whatever to your overall pack weight, but that's minimal in comparison to, what else you might have to do. If it makes you hike out a whole extra time because your pack isn't quite big enough to do what you need it to do, then you really just burned a lot of extra calories. So, I don't know, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. And then I like the idea of, just having it multifunctioning, I don't know. We were talking, actually, Tyler and I on just kind of our weekly show about how it's cool. Like y'all's packs. Well, let me just let you explain this. How does the load shelf situation work? And do all your packs have load shelves, or some of them do and some of them don't?
Yeah, so we have one frame, and then different bag options that go on that frame.
Yeah.
So you basically buy a complete pack system, and it's a bag and a frame. And then, as I mentioned, down the road, you could always buy just a bag only and then put on your same frame. Mm-hmm. But the frame basically dictates your fit, function, and performance, meaning you can buy our smallest bag and have the same load capacity in terms of max weight and in terms of hauling meat.
Yeah.
You'd have the exact same load capacity as you would if you bought our biggest bag because it's going to have the same frame. Mm-hmm. So the bag choice dictates internal gear storage.
Yeah.
But basically all of the bags quickly detach from the frame. Think of like folding it open kind of like a clamshell. Mm-hmm. And now you put your load between the bag and the frame.
Yeah.
So there's compression straps on the frame itself that begin to secure the load. And then as you reattach the bag to the frame, but now with your load in between, there's 4 more compression straps that make connections. And it's kind of subtle, but if you look at it, all of the connections from bag to frame, they're sewn at an angle. And the reason they're sewn at an angle is that as you add compression, is you're pulling the bag to the frame over the load. It's an upward angle. So as you're adding compression, you're also adding a lift. So if you have, 60 pounds of meat between the bag and the frame, you're sucking the bag back to the frame. It's providing the lift and holding that meat up nice and high and tight so it's not sagging weight on you. So, yeah, all of our systems do that. You're going to have a load shelf between the bag and the frame. You're going to have the same load hauling capability no matter which bag you choose because you have that frame. The frame itself is it's a titanium frame, so you have incredible amounts of strength at a light weight. And really the weight capacity, and we don't say this like to be, marketing, whatever. It's just the truth of we don't put a weight capacity on it because it exceeds what you want to do, basically.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, we've tested it with 250 pounds of sand just to test the integrity of the frame. Nobody's doing that in the field, right? So if you're a stud and want to pack 100 whatever pounds, the pack's going to do it. And if you're smart and only want to pack a smaller amount of weight, the pack's going to be ready for it. So, I mean, we get questions a lot as guys are, like, say they're deer hunting, be it whitetail or mule deer. Like, can I haul out a whole deer? Sure, go for it. Elk, can we do, like, a half of a boned out bull? Yep, absolutely. So, like, it's basically ready to do whatever you want to throw at it, basically at any time. And that's the whole beauty of the system is you go back quite a few years and you had a pack that was good to hunt in and then a separate pack that was good to haul loads in.
Yeah.
But like trying to find one pack system that could do all that, because if you only have a rigid frame, it might be good for heavy loads, but it's super cumbersome to hike in, to hunt in, etc. So if your frame's just rigid, now you're limiting your mobility. It's difficult to hike in. It's difficult to draw your bow. It's difficult to get into shooting position. So for us, there's this combination of providing some level of freedom of movement, especially torsionally, meaning kind of twisting and turning through your mid to upper body. But at the same time, the pack needs to be super vertically rigid to support heavy weights and not barrel or buckle or have, any sort of discomfort issue there.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I just think about all the capabilities and possibilities of like having that true load shelf situation where, I mean, for us, talking about versatility, a lot of times we're trying to figure out a way to strap a tree stand onto a
bag full of cameras.
Bag full of cameras, and it just doesn't work. But if you can put that thing between your actual bag and frame, it might be for meat hauling, but it's going to have some other, great benefits too. So it's cool that it works that way.
I mean, it's, the origins of the company are certainly in Western hunting. That's certainly where the focus is. But at the same time, more and more guys are seeing the beauty of a pack system like ours for hunting that they're doing Midwest, East, Texas, whatever, because exactly what you said, if you're the guy who's packing in tree stands on public land and trying to get a decent ways, from the crowd, even in the Midwest or wherever, like, been there, done that. It sucks to carry the tree stand just with its little straps. But if you can have a solid pack system that's going to pack your tree stand and sticks, whether you're doing a mobile setup or whether you're just packing in preseason to get it hung, it's super valuable. And then, it's just the versatility that it opens up. Like this past November, I was on a whitetail hunt in Missouri, and it wasn't super far, but I was on some public land and got about 1.25 miles deep and shot a buck and just packed the whole buck out in my pack. Forget dragging that thing 1 mile plus like everybody else is doing or riding four-wheelers into areas. I can get away from the four-wheelers. I can go where they can't go, and now I can hunt in new spots that everybody else in Missouri is overlooking because they're like, well, how the heck do you get a deer out of there? Well, you got a decent pack system, you can do it. So it's, I certainly get some looks when I'm packing a deer out in a pack like that and everybody else is sitting on their four-wheelers, but it really does open up new opportunities.
Yeah.
No, it's cool, and it's, I don't know, there's kind of just like the fun factor knowing that you do it under your own power too. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird like that, but it's like it's pretty fulfilling to do that. So no, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
Whenever you're talking about like going in with a pack and having that pack on your back and stuff, like fit's a huge thing, and I only know that from like hearing other people talk about it. Right, I've never been truly fitted for a pack. I don't know exactly what fits. I just in the past I've bought day packs and strap them on and kind of make it fit tight and go, but like what are you looking for in fit for a pack, and how do you go about deciding exactly what fits you the right way?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to speak in generality, so I'm not trying to talk about our stuff and only talk about our stuff, but in the sense, like, that's the context I have. And
yeah, sure.
One thing to look at is basically, is the pack adjustable, period? And so you get into a lot of pack systems, and they're just flat out not very adjustable. So to some extent, that pack either fits you or it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get into more of a higher-end system, it's going to have a lot more versatility and options to fit you specifically, which is, what we do.
Yeah.
So we have, and I'm not sure when this is airing, so it's kind of a interesting timing to talk about it. But as of today, we have one frame system. It's called our K2 frame. This summer, we'll be launching a new frame system, the next generation, so the K3 frame.
Uh-huh.
The new K3 frame will have even more adjustability and options to it. But in general, there's a couple main things you want to consider. One is your torso height, which is essentially, and I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but basically the length of your midsection. So you can be 6 foot and have shorter legs and a longer torso, or you could be 6 foot and have longer legs and a shorter torso. Essentially, high-quality pack systems are going to have some sort of adjustable fit for your torso length, and we have quite a range of adjustment in there, and really, really easy adjustments to make. I mean, some pack systems you kind of like, you have to tear it apart and do all this crazy stuff to adjust the torso length, whereas on ours, it's in a couple seconds, you can tune it, tweak it, try it, tune it, tweak it, try it. It's super easy. But so torso length is something. And then something that some people tend to overlook is just your hip belt and how key that is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using a pack that's one size fits all in the hip belt, you might be fine if you're, say, the average 36-inch waist or whatever, but if you're smaller or larger, you might run into trouble. And so we have 3 size-specific hip belts that cover a range. Obviously, building a hip belt that works for a guy who has a 32-inch waist and a 42-inch waist, like that 10 inches is a big, big difference. And so,
yeah,
especially with our system where we design our packs so that they transfer weight to your hips and you're not carrying it all in your upper body. I'm sure we've all been there where we've been carrying some level of weight and you're basically carrying it in the shoulders. Your upper body gets super fatigued fast. Our system is designed to have very, very small percentage amounts of weight in the shoulders, and actually the vast, vast majority of weight transferred to your hips and into your lower body. And when you're doing that, hip belts sizing becomes a critical factor. So long story short, torso height, hip belts, all that needs to be, very adjustable or size specific for you, unless you just happen to be the super average guy and that pack happens to fit you. But
I am a very super average guy. Thanks for putting that.
Dude, we had a wedding last year that I was in, and one of the groomsmen was not average at all. He was, I think, a 44 waist and a 29 inseam, so he was a little different probably than your average guy. Might have tough time finding the pack that fits him right, but that's where you might just have to do a lot of box step ups, right?
Yeah,
get into shape,
fit into the pack instead.
So you've talked a lot about the pack, and then how your core, whether it's the belt is going around your core to kind of hold up the whole pack, or you're just talking about mobility in the backcountry. Your core is very important, and so moving on down, your feet are very important when you talk about having 100 pounds on your back as well. So and then taking care of your feet. So, like, are you wearing boots? You wearing trail runners? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, this is like maybe the most important and the worst thing to discuss ever. I mean, your feet can make or break your hunt quickly. So, I mean, if you get out there and you're having significant blisters or pain or discomfort in your feet, I mean, how the heck can you keep hunting? How can you hike in the mountains? How can you chase elk? How can you cover ground if your feet are tore up? And so it's obviously
I might just
critical.
die back there. Like, I don't know if I can get back to the truck even.
Yeah. So it's super, super critical. And then it's also the worst thing ever to talk about, because I could tell you about my favorite boot and how great it is, and you could try it and it could absolutely wreck your feet.
Yeah.
And so it's just super difficult to make like specific recommendations there. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we've tried to do podcasts on this. We've talked, I mean, I'm not the expert, but I know so many experienced hunters and talking with them. And it's like, what is there? I mean, we were having this conversation with somebody yesterday. We always say it's like part trial and error. But how do you, like, what are some shortcuts? Like, how do you lessen that curve of finding the right boot for you? And honestly, I don't know that there is a shortcut.
Yeah. So there's not like any like tips. So if I was to walk into a Cabela's or something, I could try on these boots, and if it was touching here or there, then it's probably going to create a hot spot or a blister. I mean, other than spending thousands of dollars on boots, possibly, there's really no way to tell, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in terms of shopping, go somewhere local if you can. Try as many different options if you can. For some guys, that's difficult because they don't have a Cabela's, they don't have an REI, they don't have a whatever to try a bunch of different options. At that point, you can fall back on, be it Amazon or Zappos or Backcountry.com or all those different places that are going to give you free returns, basically, where you can try it in the house. Is you're trying boots on, you want to, I mean, a few things come to mind. Obviously, more than just walking around the house, try and do some level of inclines, like whether that's stairs or what have you, but the way that your foot interacts with that boot on flat ground is going to be different than the way it interacts when you're climbing or when you're side hilling or what have you. And so not only doing, say stairs in your house, if you're trying to boot, you can't go outside because of the returns. I would go so far as to set up some level of uneven surfaces in your house, meaning like step off the edge of things, like plant your foot where it's not perfectly flat and level, stand on some inclines, declines, like feel your heel pockets slipping or not. Try different lacing techniques. Think about what socks you're going to be wearing, because socks can make a huge difference. I mean, yeah, we could talk a ton about that. But, I mean, things to look for, obviously heel slip is going to be one of the major issues that can make things go wrong fast. If your heel's moving, creating friction, you're going to get hot spots, you're going to get blisters. That's no bueno. So how a boot fits you in the heel cup is really important. What complicates that is a boot might have a really great heel cup for your foot, but sometimes you might feel like your heel's a little high or a little low in that heel cup. And so sometimes it's just a matter of trying a different insole in that boot before you just chuck that boot altogether, because insoles have different volume or different stack height. Mm-hmm. And so as you increase or decrease insole height, it's moving your foot or your heel up or down within the heel cup, which can be really important to kind of fine tune that. Another thing to look for is room in the foot box. So if you have a wider or more narrow foot, or your toes cramped basically up in that foot box, because another place is if your toes are cramped, like on the outside, especially on your pinky side, you can get lots of rubbing or bad contact or pressure there. That can create problems. You want to ensure that, like, a boot needs to be relatively snug, but not tight. So if it's too big, it's going to be more prone to heel slip. If it's too small, think about what happens to your foot on day 4 or 5 when you've been hiking quite a few miles. Your foot's just going to naturally swell because you've been doing a ton of miles. and it might be warm. And so you think through, if my foot swells, do I still have room? And then also think through downhills. So if you don't have enough room at the end of the boot and you're doing downhill, which you're no doubt going to do,
Yeah.
and your toes are making contact at the end of the boot, especially while going downhill, you're going to be in a world of hurt quick. So you need enough space at the toe end of the boot so that you're not making a ton of contact going downhill, because you'll basically start losing toenails in a hurry.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Doing that. So, yeah, I mean, those are some things to look at. I know that was rambly, but hopefully that helps. And then just in terms of like feet care, I can't say enough how important it is to change socks. Even on like a 7-day hunt, I'll typically only have 2 pairs, meaning a pair I'm wearing and a pair of extras. But I'm changing those not only daily, but even usually through the day. So if I take a lunch break, a lot of times I'll change socks, put my quote-unquote fresh ones on. If ones I take off are super wet or nasty, instead of just throwing them in my pack, a lot of times I'll hang them off the back of my pack so that they can air dry. And just keeping on top of changing socks is really important. If you do start to experience any sort of hot spot, like not even a blister, but just a hot spot, like stop and take care of it right away, because it's just going to get worse. One of the best things I've found is Leuko tape. It's like Lueko, I believe, tape.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff, like compared to a Band-Aid or an actual, like call it blister patch or whatever, Leuko tape sticks and holds like nothing else. So if you put Leuko tape on, you can sweat as much as you want. You can go jump in the creek or the pond and take a bath on day 3, but that Leuko tape's going to be on your foot at the end of your hunt on day 7. Like the stuff just stays put.
Is there a difference between Leuko and athletic tape?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of similarities for sure, and I'm like not the guy to tell you exactly how they're different. But I have Leuko tape, and I have your basic like white athletic tape.
Mm-hmm.
The Leuko tape is a little bit thicker, holds a little bit better. It doesn't seem to be quite as like porous, so it's a little more dense, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Than a lot of your common athletic tape. And then it tends to, I know the stuff I have, which I just bought a roll and I've had it for years and thankfully I don't have too many issues. I don't have to use it too much, but like my roll anyway is wider. It's probably 2.5 inches, which obviously you can buy wider athletic tape, but a lot of times it's going to come in like maybe an inch width. So yeah, it's definitely not the exact same. They might feel similar, but there's certainly some not only tactile differences, but performance differences there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right.
I will say, sorry, just on the
go
Leuko tape situation, if you have a blister, like an actual blister, I would not put Leuko tape directly on it. I would put some sort of gauze or something over the blister itself and then put the Leuko tape over it. Because the Leuko tape's going to hold so well that when you have that soft, blistery skin, if you go to remove the Leuko tape, it's removing all of that skin with it.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, like it's coming off. So if you have a developed hot spot or blister or like an open, like say a popped open blister, something like that, do a thin layer of gauze on that and then Leuko tape over the top, because if not, you're going to be peeling off chunks of your feet with Leuko tape.
Man, every time we ask this boot question, it always ends up going into like something nasty and off-putting about feet. Every time.
And it's around lunch usually. So
If you want to talk about it, we have stories like from that death hike we did last year. It was almost 100 miles, and
death by foot blister.
People who literally started getting blisters within like the first 6 miles.
Oh no!
And they fit like there's only about 2/3 of the guys finished. There's a bunch of guys who didn't finish, but there was guys who finished where, like, I legitimately looked at them and I would never question their man card, because the condition of their feet and how many miles they hiked on absolutely torn up feet was unbelievable. I mean, there was guys who finished that hike with more Leuko tape on their feet than they had skin on their feet. I mean, it was people like were peeling off leukotape and toenails were attached to it.
No.
I mean, we can get gross.
No.
We can get real gross.
Sir. No, sir.
I don't know, man. There's a thin line between tough and stupid sometimes, and I flirt with it pretty often. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah,
man, that's
there's a guy who like the death hike tore him up so bad last year, and this was late June, early July. His feet were still in such rough shape come elk season, like September, October. He still couldn't hunt.
Oh, no.
I mean, he hunted, but he couldn't. His feet still weren't normal. And so this year he was like, "No, I'm not doing the death hike."
I ain't risking that. No way. You know, I don't know. It's kind of funny you bring that up. So I'm a part-time youth minister, so I hang out with kids a lot, and they're always wanting to race and mess around and stuff. And the other day we were at a major league ball game, and like this one kid wanted to race back to the van. Well, I'm like, I don't really turn down challenges ever, and so I'm like, all right. And so it's like 200 yards, and we take off sprinting, and he cheats and jumps off, goes before go, and I'm about to catch him, and then I feel my hammy tweak and tighten up, and I'm like, oh no, did I just draw a Gila tag and pull a hamstring? and luckily it didn't. It was just like a kind of a little tweak. It wasn't like a bad tear or anything. I'm kind of over it now, but man, that's like a big consideration. Like the older you get and the more like hunting becomes important to you. Not that those two things kind of go hand in hand, but often they do. Your off-season preparation and things you do, like we're talking about fitness and nutrition and stuff like that becomes more important. And then you think about like, man, maybe I shouldn't climb this tree just to have fun because I could fall out of it and then I miss hunting season, just things like that kind of start to pop up. But so, okay, let's say that you've done your death hike into 28-mile bear hunt and you've prepared well with your boot and sock selection. Your feet are not too torn up, but just in general, you're very tired. What does Mark have in his pack to sleep on and sleep in?
Good question. So two things. One is sleep is really important. The other thing is I've actually, this ties into getting older. I mean, I'm only in my mid-30s, but, I'm definitely not 20 anymore. I pay more attention, not only in something like the death hike, but even like a hunt to like quote unquote recovery.
Yeah.
And so something that is easily overlooked, but I do a lot that you might already have with you is your trekking poles are fantastic for rolling out muscles.
That's cool.
So like at the end of the day or midday, I'll roll out my calves or my quads or my hammies or my IT band, or if anything's bugging me or just feels fatigued or tight, using your trekking pole as either a roller or basically like a pressure stick to work on your muscles is definitely more important as you get older, and something that I do more and more. So that's kind of on the topic of recovery, that's really important.
That's a new one for me, man. I hadn't heard that. So thanks for that.
It's a good tip. Good tip.
Yeah, and then I've even gone as far as, last year on the death hike, I packed one of those balls that are meant for rolling out pressure points. Mm-hmm. And that was specifically for the death hike just because I knew we were doing crazy mileage. But since then, I found one. It's from this company called Rawology, like RAW, Rawology. Mm-hmm. And they make cork balls for rolling out on, and the reason they're cork is they're just crazy light. So I had the one I used last year was 7 ounces, and this one's like 1 point something. So I'll even pack that now, and that's really good for rolling out your feet or again any sort of muscles. So yeah, that's not like the super macho thing to talk about, but doing that type of thing can make a difference on multi-day hunts for sure.
That's cool, man.
Sleeping is obviously important. I'm always looking for ways to save pack weight when possible. I will say that sleeping is one of those things where after trying to go as light as possible for a while, I've swung the pendulum back and realized how important sleep is and comfort is. And basically the lightest pad isn't the best pad. So in terms of sleep, on the sleeping pad, I'm looking for something that's 3 inches at least, probably in thickness. Obviously, we're talking inflatable pads here. Also, don't underestimate the importance of the R value of your pad, meaning the insulation of the pad. Like, it's the only thing between you and the ground. And if you don't have a pad that's insulated well, it can make a massive difference in how cold you sleep. Whether or not you have a great sleeping bag or not, the pad can be a huge factor. So yeah, I use, there's a pad from the company Nemo, Nemo, Nemo. They have one called the Tensor, insulated sleeping pad. I've been using that for 3 or 4 years and absolutely love it. I've had some good luck with like Big Agnes pads in the past. Sea to Summit makes some good insulated pads, but one of those inflatable insulated sleeping pads is totally worth it, and I would be leery of going with the lightest option just to save some ounces, because from a comfort and durability perspective, I've definitely had some issues as I've tried to kind of push that boundary of just going, yeah, I want this pad because it's light. So yeah, that's important. What else did you ask about besides sleeping pads?
Well, like as far as your bag goes, are you running like kind of it seems to be the standard is like a 20-degree bag for a lot of dudes. Do you go one way or the other, and then like, down synthetic? Like, what's your bag look like?
Yeah. I'm a down for the most part. I think for most guys, if we're keeping the conversation to lower 48, and we're kind of keeping it to, what we're talking about, like say you're New Mexico, elk hunt, like that type of thing, down's usually fine. Obviously, it can be a different story for getting coastal, Northwest, Alaska, something like that. Like sometimes down's too much of a risk with moisture, but it's easy to take care of down in your average 48 conditions, and even a lot of the down these days is treated, where it's not going to be waterproof, but still performs well when it gets some level of moisture. So down is essentially, it's going to take up a lot less space in your pack than synthetic. It's going to have a longer life in the end than synthetic fibers. And yeah, I mean, it's just better performance for the weight and space and longevity. So down, yeah, I'm definitely a fan of. Yeah, I think 20 degree is a good number. The difficult thing with like degree ratings, and this has gotten better, but in the past, like a company could claim basically whatever they wanted on temperature ratings on their bags. Like there's some standardization on that now. There's like called EN temp rating. Mm-hmm. So where some companies do more of standardized tests. So when company A is making a rating and company B is making a rating, they're making that rating from the same testing protocol, if you will, whereas before they didn't have to. Mm-hmm. The other thing to be really cognizant of with temperature ratings is most companies are going to have a different temperature ratings. One is the comfort temperature, and one is the basically you're going to freeze your nuts off, but you'll live temperature. And so the 20-degree bag might keep you alive at 20 degrees, but you're going to hate life. Yeah. Because the actual comfort rating on that might be 35. Mm-hmm. So that's something to look at as well, is if you're looking at temperature rating, number one, is it a standardized, like, actual temperature rating? And number two is it, I think they call it the lower limit, which is basically kind of like the safety survivability rating, or is it the comfort rating, which is basically what you want to pay attention to if you have a 30-degree bag and knowing that you actually be comfortable at 30 degrees.
Yeah, for sure. And comfort's a big thing for me and Tyler both. We've discussed this. Like, man, I'm willing to go a couple extra pounds if it means I'm going to be comfortable and just enjoy my experience, So I got a down bag that I'm looking to try out this season and kind of excited about it. But I've just kind of been worried about the down thing some, just because of, like, I'm learning more and more about how bad moisture is for it, and like you were saying, we're going to a very arid part of the country, so it's not so much a worry about getting rain every day, but, like, what precautions do you take, like, for monsoon season? Like, whenever you pack your stuff up in your pack, say you got pack on your back to go hunt that day, are you using a dry bag, or what are you doing there?
Yeah, I'm not most of the time. Basically, I only am using a dry bag if the conditions call for it. Yeah. So, I mean, it is certainly smart to have that as an option. There's advantages to, like on your sleeping bag specifically, to not having it within its own dry bag. If you pack it within a dry bag, it's obviously protected, but if you don't need that protection, if the weather allows for it, we really prefer to loose pack the sleeping bag in the pack, basically because it conforms to fill any shape and void within the pack.
Yeah.
Versus if you put it in a compression sack, you now have this giant block, this blob, and now you're going to have this blob in your pack and all kinds of little voids and nooks and crannies that other gear won't fit in. Whereas basically you just put your down bag in your pack first and let it naturally compress as you're adding other gear to it. The pack or the sleeping bag is going to basically conform and fill these nooks and crannies, and in the end you just can pack more efficiently. But yeah, if the conditions are dicey, a dry bag is a really good option, whether that's a dry bag specifically for your sleeping bag. Like in our pack systems, we actually have a complete dry bag liner.
Oh.
And the packs are very water resistant, but on our system, you can actually have where your whole pack bag is basically lined with a waterproof liner, so that's an option. But yeah, something to look at. I pretty much always will have a dry bag with me that's capable of carrying my sleeping bag, even if I'm not using it all the time to compress my sleeping bag, because for me, a dry bag can serve multiple purposes. If I'm in country where I need to hang my food, sometimes I'm just throwing all of my food in that dry bag and hoisting that up into the tree. So yeah, it's just one of those, like a good size, lightweight dry bag is one of those things that is a few ounces that can serve multiple purposes. And so it's maybe something you always want to have with you.
Yeah, for sure. So what about water, man? How does your water system look? Are you a Nalgene guy or a bladder? And how do you take advantage of water when you're around it?
Yeah. I have a pretty simple system. I use bladders for the most part. I typically do have some sort of bottle with me, usually not a Nalgene. A lot of times I'll stop at a gas station and those smart water bottles. I could care less about the fact that it's voodoo water and has electrolytes in smart water, but the shape of that bottle is super nice and they're really light and durable. So a lot of times I'll have one of those, and I basically use that if I want to mix any drinks. Not meaning like a Scotch on the Rocks mixed drink or something, but powders. And so if I'm whatever you want to call it, like if you're the Mountain Ops guy or whatever, and you're mixing that type of thing, I'll keep that out of my bladder just because bladders can get funky if you introduce things other than water in them. So yeah, my primary water source is the bladder. I use a Sawyer squeeze filter, which is basically a little filter element you connect to a dirty bag. So you take one bag, you fill it with dirty water, you screw this filter element on that bag, and then you basically squeeze your dirty water through the filter element, and the filter element has a stream output of now clean filtered water. The beauty and kind of a key piece on that is you can take your average drinking tube from your hydration bladder, and Sawyer sells what's called a quick disconnect kit. Long story short is you can take your mouthpiece off of your drinking tube, connect the water filter to your drinking tube, and now without removing your water bladder from your pack, you basically push clean filtered water down the drinking tube and into your water bladder, filling your water bladder without ever touching it. And so that's the system that I use. It's really simple, pretty dang cheap, and has been really reliable. So yeah, I can basically, if I want to filter on demand, I can just fill up my bladder at any time by quickly disconnecting the mouthpiece and then essentially pushing clean water into my bladder. The other part of that system I really like is if I'm pretty good on water, but maybe passing a water source and know that I might not get to another one for a while, I'll just take my dirty bladder and just fill up with that dirty water and just carry it, and I can filter it later whenever the heck I want. So yeah. I really like that option as well. There's obviously pumps and Steripens and all that, but there's pros and cons to each of them, and at least for me and my needs and preferences, that Sawyer squeeze kind of is the best of all the options.
Yeah, it's an interesting little system, and the smart water thing is something we've heard. So did you teach Trent, or did Trent teach you about this stuff? Because I feel like I know where this is going to go, but we had Trent Fisher on a while back, and he even said smart water bottle he gets at a gas station. So like to hear those two phrases, both from two different people, somebody had to teach one of the others. So how did that go?
I don't know on that one specifically. I will say I've been doing that before I met Trent, but I think he would say the same thing. So maybe there's like a mutual inspiration, and it wasn't direct from either of us.
Yeah, that's true. That's the very humble way of saying it too. So good job, Mark.
Bro, you're the OG. Come on, you're the OG. Let them know.
The thing I love about hunting with Trent, so we have this thing that we do with Exo Mountain Gear called "What's in My Pack," and so it's basically different guys, and they take their gear list and they show what's in their pack. I've constantly begged Trent to shoot one, but if we ever do with Trent, it's not going to be called What's in My Pack. It's going to be called What's on My Pack. Because Trent is just like, he looks like the guy from Mary Poppins with all the crap hanging off of him. He'll have like a jacket hanging off of his pack, and his trekking poles are dangling, and all have like something else flying out of his pocket. So I love Trent. It's he uses his pack as like some sort of, I don't even know how he straps crap onto it. I'm like, dude, why don't you just put it inside the bag? That's what it's made for. But he's got his own style, man. It's what's on my pack. I love it.
That's kind of like Tyler. Tyler uses bungee straps like you put on a foiler or something pretty often. I'm like, man, really? I mean, just little additions to it. No, it's funny. Everybody's got their own style, and that's kind of what we're going to do is kind of take, our ideas, take people who know what they're doing and try what they're doing and kind of come up with your own thing. So, Mark,
for sure,
you know your stuff, dude, and we really appreciate your time that you spent with us and letting us pick your brain about this stuff. And it shows that you're a pro, man. So if people want to learn more about you and what Exo Mount Gear has going on, where can we send them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd hit exomountgear.com. Even if you have zero interest in a pack, I would say go there, and under resources, there's that training plan we talked about, that nutrition plan we talked about, and then you'll also see a link that just says gear list that's also under resources. So like all those What's in My Pack videos, there's a dozen plus of those. And basically, if you're the guy who's trying to figure out what works or see what people are doing, I mean, part of the beauty is you can look at, call it 15 different gear lists from different guys who have different perspectives, but you also see a lot of what's in common. And so I'd say learn from that, and especially where you see commonalities, pay attention, because if 5 guys are doing the same thing, like maybe it's worth trying it. So those gear lists are there, and that's just a really good resource to look at.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Cool. Well, we'll be sure to link to all that stuff down below. Do you have any big hunts? We've talked about the hunt we're prepping for. Do you have any big hunts coming up this season?
So we're doing that bear hunt here in just next week, basically. And then this fall, it's still pinching myself when I say this, and I can't help but smile when I say this. I'm going to Alaska, which is something I've always wanted to do.
Awesome.
And as it turns out, now we're just going twice to Alaska. So we're going for caribou in September, and then we're going to go up in November on Kodiak Island for a blacktail. So those are kind of 2 bucket list adventures, if you will. And, we figured you're paying the $100 or whatever for the Alaska license. You might as well take 2 trips to get the best for your money. So, just trying to be efficient. That's
right.
all.
No, that's cool, man. That sounds like an awesome dream trip, and I can't wait to see more about that. And real quick, y'all have your own podcast that you do that's specific to backcountry stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's called the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. You can actually see that under that same resources section on our website. There's a podcast link there.
Yeah.
Hunt the Backcountry Podcast. You can, wherever the heck you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you can find ours there as well. But it is, it's pretty much myself and Steve, who's essentially the co-host, basically just having all kinds of different conversations as it relates to backcountry hunting with guests. So sometimes we're doing a specific series, like we've done building a backcountry rifle, we've done archery series. sometimes it's very species specific. So there's a ton of great elk content, or, bear hunting or mule deer. And then we dive into gear, safety, basically if it relates to backcountry hunting, whether it's hunting tactics, training, nutrition, safety, like anything you can imagine, we kind of try and cover it at one point or another.
Yeah.
And we've had it for a few years as well. So I would say if you do check it out, make sure you kind of scroll back through older episodes, because there's a decent chance that we've talked about something that you'd want to check out, even in the archive.
Yeah, cool. Awesome, man. We'll be sure to link to some stuff like that below. And again, Mark, good luck this season, man, and thanks so much for spending time with us, dude.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your hunt. This will be the first year in many years I'm not hunting elk in September, so I'm going to have to live vicariously through you guys.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, we will try to do you proud, man, I promise. So we'll do our best.
No pressure.
All right, thanks, man.
All right, see you guys.
See ya. Man, that was some killer info. If you found this interview helpful, be sure and leave us a review below and comment what you thought was the most helpful tip from this episode.
For sure. Make sure you also follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, and also subscribe on YouTube so you can see how these hunts turn out.
Remember, this is your element.
Live in it. Been waiting my whole life for that.